guy uses. I hope that thing works. If not, then I'm going to have to talk about that. But self-written, and we've come 360 degrees. The problem is it's much worse today than it was the writs of assistance that they used back. No judicial process whatsoever. In 1767, you had the Townshend Act, and the Townshend Act was really kind of despicable, because the Townshend Acts it placed duties and so on things here in America, but it also started saying we have power over you, and we have all power over you, the colonies. Up until that time, the colonies were thinking we're British. We're English citizens and so on. We're irritated. They were especially irritated because Samuel Adams kept reminding them that, especially with this stuff, that they're being taxed without representation. You had the Boston man, a dozen of colonists who felt threatened, and some of them fired into the crowd. They killed 5 people and wounded some others, and so they were taken and were charged with murder. And the problem is they couldn't find any lawyer in America who would defend them. Most lawyers, probably along with George Wythe, in the country. And John Adams was a politician. He was Samuel Adams' brother. He obviously ended up being second president of the United States, and he was really against what the English were doing. And so the king comes in and says, are you a hypocrite, or do you believe what you say? You believe that, among other things, which we wrote into the Bill of Rights later, that every person ought to have an attorney. They ought to have their civil rights protected. Not necessarily to advocate their cause, but to have an attorney. I'm getting ahead. He just said to have an attorney. And John Adams finally said, he got back to him later finally, and he didn't want to do it. He said, this is going to ruin my political career, and I don't like these guys, and they were wrong to fire into the crowd and so on. And but he said to the king, all right, yes, they should be able, and nobody else will do it, I'll be their attorney. So he gets them off. He advocates their cause and says that, and shows that they did feel intimidated. They thought their lives were threatened, and even though they had guns and the others didn't, and he got them off, and apparently did not ruin his soul. As largely, John Adams, it was understood what he had done, that it's what we do in America. Whether you're guilty or innocent, you have the right to have an attorney. I would just add to that, I believe in, I don't like our adversary system a whole lot. That's the reason I didn't practice law. I believe that, I would defend Hitler himself and make sure his civil rights are not in defending their civil rights. It's hard to draw a line between that and advocate their cause. He got them off.
Is that where he picked up the nickname?
That was the Boston Massacre. And then in 1772, it's a big deal, but Sam Adams, his brother, started the Committee of Correspondence, which was like a correspondence. It was like a... It was like 10 people, but they would also do this by, they didn't call them, they didn't have phones, but they'd do it by horseback and so on. They were the Minutemen, and they could get the word out to the hinterlands really fast, more rapidly than any of the postal and so on. And so he started that, and within a year, he and his 2 sidekicks, Paul Revere and John Hancock, got all the other colonies to form committees of correspondence. You had all 13 committees of correspondence, and they could get the word out really rapidly. There. In 1773, Parliament passed this. It's weak to me. I don't know why people like tea, but maybe you get addicted to it, or maybe it just makes you feel good. They wanted. And so they brought it over here, and Samuel Adams, of course, the PR guy, the civil disobedience guy. And he wasn't just civil disobedience like Gandhi or Martin Luther King that were doing passive civil disobedience. His was active civil disobedience, intimidating Indians, and went down there and dumped tons, and then in 70, I recall, on Boston Harbor there, and wouldn't let them do any business, go anywhere, even within the colonies and so on, until they paid for all this tea that they had dumped in the. At least that was the thing. I don't know the history. I don't know if they ever paid for that tea, because the revolution came within a couple of years. But okay, so now we're down. The number one thing was that it was also a big deal, was that George Washington was Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, which did not exist before. Well, we should mention him probably, but yes, I do want to. In 74, there are two different Continental Congresses. In 1774, there was the first Continental Congress. I get those mixed up sometimes with the constitutional conventions because there were the first and second constitutional convention. The way I remember it is that in the Continental Congresses, nothing really happened in the first one, but in the second one, the second Continental Congress, which was 75 to 76, we had these two major things that had happened. But one of the things they did there in 71, they didn't get all the states together there, they couldn't, but they did draw up a Declaration of Rights, sent it to the king, which he ignored again. But that Declaration of Rights was inspiring, and it had a lot of the kinds of wording that ended up being used in the Constitution and in the Declaration and in the Constitution. In 1775, so this is in March, so it's over a year before July of 1776, Patrick Henry gave his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. He was a brand new delegate. He was one smart, if you've ever dealt with state legislatures, it takes a while to learn, and the freshmen are generally just, it takes some time for them to learn how you can deal with deal with the establishment, but the rules that have been made up to kind of you got to play by or find a way to. But he worked them right from the very beginning, and he came up with this. He gave his famous speech: "Is life so dear, peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty and give me death." That was in 1775. There still, at that time, was not general, there never was general support, but there was. In that last year or so, the support for the revolution, for independence, was growing. They knew this was a life and death thing, and this would affect every one of their lives if they declared independence from Great Britain. It wasn't just something you did lightly. But he gave that speech then in 1775. We also had the Lexington and Concord. So the war had begun. It wasn't official. We didn't have a commander-in-chief or anything, but you had the militias there that were dying at Lexington and Concord. And then you had Ethan Allen and the Green Allen Boys also.
It's interesting to know that those militias were usually led by preachers.
As a matter of fact, we've all heard the quote from, what's his name? De Tocqueville, when he's talking about what was the greatness of America. And he said it wasn't in their mighty mountains and their resources and this, that, and the other. Was the flaming pulpits. Yes, the Ticonderoga Congress here, later going along. It's one of my pet peeves. We've got historians, they're not revisionist historians. What happened was that early on, I guess where I would want to start is that the House of Burgundy the lead. Massachusetts had Sam Adams and John Adams, but Virginia had George Washington and James Madison and George Mason, who was bigger than James Madison, at the time. He had written there, and George Wythe, the #1 lawyer in America, the kind of father of lawyers and so on. Anyway, the Virginia had passed a resolution back and saying that they should propose to the national legislature, their delegates, Richard Henry Lee and so on, they should propose to the national delegates that we should declare our independent support for it yet. We're waiting for Virginia, and was brought to draw up a Declaration of Independence, if that's what ought to be done. And the committee was made up of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, who was the chairman, of course, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. And so they were supposed to draw this document about explaining the reasons for independence. And that resolution was approved on July 2nd. It was approved. They voted on that, and they approved the resolution. Just a little thing here. But a resolution, when you vote on a resolution, that just states the feelings, the opinions of the used when you can't use it to fight this battle and so on. Well, they had this resolution of independence, and then you had the committee of 5 that were drawn up here. I think before that, we don't know exactly how many of these. None of the founding fathers had it all wanted strictly representation. Never confederate under that, because that's tyranny. We'll never have any say in the government, only the large states will. And it almost, as you'll see in a movie that we'll watch, it almost broke up the Constitution. They finally came up with a great compromise, which was proportional representation according to population in the House, but the states are equal in the Senate, 2 senators each, just like it was under the Articles of Confederation. How did I get off on that?
What did Kennedy say?
Oh, Kennedy, there you go. Well, Kennedy had a thank you. So you're dealing with an old guy here. He had a group of supposedly some of the most brilliant, I don't know if they were scientists or philosophers or what they were, but in his comments at the beginning, he said to them that this is probably the greatest gathering of intelligence here in the White House since Jefferson dined here alone. I think Jefferson was the first president in the White House. I'm not sure if he was. Maybe John Adams was there, but George Washington was never there. It wasn't built. It was and it was a direct descendant of Roger Sherman. And I said, man, I envy you. So
Just to clarify something, I didn't know about Prescott, but last week I was teaching my little elementary kids about Paul Revere, and we pulled up something on the internet that said Paul Revere did not do all that. Really, the person that did it was somebody named Prescott.
well, there was Prescott and there was Warren. I don't think, I'd
Is
have
that
to go back.
revisionist?
There were 3 of them. No, I think what it's referring to is there's 3 of them who did the ride, you know. They were trying to get them, figuring someone would get caught, and they did. I can't remember now if Paul Revere got all the way to Concord,
No,
or if it, I
this
don't
was
think.
saying that Paul Revere honored Prescott, but the name Revere was easier to remember.
Hey, and he was the main
because
guy.
of the poem.
He
And
had
I
it up
thought,
to do.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it was Paul Revere and Dr. Warren, great paper. You should come
I'm
to.
going to say something about that, because in all my history, I had never heard that.
I had forgotten about it, you know.